First of all, the situation is my aunt was pregnant, and about 4 weeks after when she found out she was pregnant, the doctor told her that if she had a baby, she would die. So over like several months, it like ripped apart our family a little bit. There were a lot of differing viewpoints between my grandparents and my aunt and uncle and myself, for instance. But I was wondering if the mother for sure is going to die upon giving birth, is it morally acceptable to abort the baby, or is it a sin to abort it, knowing that the mother is going to die?
Well, even in nature, you know, I mean, we see that that a she-bear will defend its young, you know, to the death. You know, I mean, and you know, the hypothetical question is just that. You know, I mean, you try to save both lives. What you're trying to do.
Of course, because that's the ideal situation.
It's not, and it's possible, you know, almost every time. You know, I mean, you know,
and like what we're talking about right now.
What kind of condition did she have?
She was a little bit older. She was in her mid-40s.
Well, that's not going to cause her not to. I mean,
and she had multiple sclerosis as well.
Well, even so, you know, that would make it. That you know, she could still, you know.
Right, and I agree that it's such a negligible amount of cases. It's probably less than 1% where one of them is at risk.
Even that, she's not at risk. I mean, even with multiple sclerosis, because you know, I've known. In fact, I got a good friend of mine, Adrian Horian, and his wife had multiple sclerosis, and she was also pregnant, and she was also faced with, you know, I mean, she was also told the same thing. And you know what they did? She changed her diet, and she actually conquered the multiple sclerosis. One of the few cases that do it, but you can do that through diet. And she gave birth to a little girl, and and that little girl is very healthy.
That's great.
And so is her mom. And they because of the good nutrition, you know, that they had, you know, I mean,
it's amazing. I'm really happy for both of them.
Yeah. So you know, so I personally know, you know, that couple. Her name is Fiona Horian.
No, it's a beautiful thing. But I'm saying somebody who's kind of has to internalize the ethical dilemma of being told you will die if you have this baby, even if there is.
Doctors are often wrong.
Right, of course.
Right.
But my uncle kind of also had to push and pull, saying, I'm either going to lose my baby or lose my wife. Is it ethically permissible after about 3 weeks to abort the baby?
No. You see, from the moment of fertilization, that's a human being, that's a person, fully human. It's not worth less than an adult.
I agree. I put them on equal footing.
Right.
But that's why if it's on equal footing, it's hard to say, you know, mother or child, because it's on equal footing.
You always try and say both. You always try
and
say both.
Because you don't want anybody to die.
Right.
Right. But I'm saying if you put those two values, those two lives on the same, that's why it was hard, and that's why still now I kind of struggle with it as a person. It was 6 years ago.
It really is a no-brainer. I mean, you know, when you get down to it, it's not a struggle. You know, I mean, you try to save both lives.
Of course.
And the mother should do that too. You know, I imagine she's experiencing guilt, you know, from doing that, because you know she knows that she should have.
Of course, and why it's even more hard for her is because it ultimately came down to her husband, who said, you know, I can't live my life without you. We can try again, and hopefully, or we can adopt if we really want to have kids.
Well, that's selfishness, you know, when you get right down to it. You know, I mean. You know,
to not give up your own life for someone else would be selfish.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah, like taking a bullet for the loved one, for instance.
Right. Not to try and save your child, you know, I mean, even at risk to your own life, you know, right. There's always risk to your own life and everything, you know.
Anything.
I go to a job, you know, I mean, I risk my life somewhat.
You get in a car and you're driving a car.
Right. It's more negligible, so it's like, how big of a risk is it, you know, I mean. Right. So and the thing is that it's not that big a risk. You know, I mean, you can have a healthy baby, but even if it did cost you your life, it's more honorable to you know, to do that than let your child perish. For instance, if your child was in a house, you know, a burning house, and it was not really like a life-threatening fire, you know. Right, you'd go after that child. Well, it's no different, except that you don't know who that child is. You haven't bonded to it. You haven't given it a name. You don't know what sex it is. Yeah.
I would argue that you're actually closer with that, because it's part of
right.
oneself. But are you saying preferentially it's kind of almost more poetic to pass on the life from mother to child than vice versa?
No, you take risks. I mean, it's on it. It's not a sure thing she's going to die because she has multiple sclerosis. Or even if she had, let's say, a sure thing, whatever it is, I don't know what it is.
Right.
Because I've seen all kinds of instances where people had cancer, where people had, and they didn't want to get they didn't want to get chemo or whatever it was, because they thought it was going to harm the baby. But yet they were managed their treatment of the disease around. They managed this treatment of the disease around the rest of the baby. And a lot of times, when they had chemo, it didn't affect the baby at all.
So you would say instead of saying that putting more value on the mother or child, just putting it up to chance, or
treat them equally. Yeah, treat them equally as patients. Sometimes you have to put more of the onus on the baby. Sometimes you have to put more of the onus on the mother. But treat them equally. They're both deserve have a right to life, and it's. You can't come up with an ironclad thing, in gray areas like that.
There's always gray areas, especially in any medical. And I'm asking also because I'm going to be in med school next year.
Right.
So unfortunately, I don't know what I'm going to be specializing in. But say, for instance, if I was in a situation where I was giving birth, or not me personally, but a mother was giving birth, and I had to choose between the mother's life or the baby's.
You'd be a gynecologist.
Right, of course. Okay. But which would be more ethically acceptable, more morally acceptable to preserve the life of the baby or to preserve the life of the mother?
Both equally.
Both. But if it comes down to because you can't always do both.
And then you also explain the risks to the mother and the parents, because they are they're involved in that.
Right.
And so it's their call. But you never kill the baby.
Of course.
But you may
because one's
pursue.
Active and one's a passive.
You may pursue a course of treatment that is more threatening to the baby or the mother. Depending on her decision. On it. That's an area.
This would help. But but I was just curious, as a future medical professional, if I'm ever put in that situation where I have 3 seconds to decide if I have to preserve the life of the mother or bring in new life from the baby, which one would be more?
I can't give you an ironclad rule for a 3-second rule, but I gave you enough information, to make a decision in there. There's 1,000 different things that come into play.
Of course.
In that type of a thing, and but I think I gave you a principle, with that both lives are equal. They both are precious. They both have the same worth, and even in nature, the baby, is generally preferential. In it.
Right, because mother instinct is always to save the child before herself.
In a Chinese culture, it's the older person whose life is more preferential. That's a cultural thing.
That's in the Chinese culture. I've never heard that.
They worship their ancestors in some parts of China. And so they see an older person is worth more because they've lived so long and they've got wisdom and all this other kind of stuff. Where here in Western culture, it's totally opposite.
It's almost tipped in favor of the baby almost.
Right. So there's 1,000 things that play when you get into gray areas, But to understand that both lives are precious. One course of treatment is actively killing the child, and the other is passively.
Right. And there's one thing actively doing something, and there's another thing in the operating room where the baby's coming out, and if the baby it's not going to live, it's completely different. Kind of having it die. That sounds bad. Having it die versus actively taking steps to kill.
Right.
And that's kind of the distinction between someone dying and someone being murdered.
Right. And that's where you can't.
There's always gray areas.
There are gray areas like that, and a person has to make it's a medical professional. You have to make your best call. Based on what you see. And but if you're if you understand the other principles, on it,
then you just have to take those building blocks and apply them to different situations.
Right. And in fact, you can make those decisions in 1,000th of a second. It's not hard.
Gut decision.
Right. It's a gut decision. And sometimes it's going to be wrong. You know, and that's the way it is. You know, sometimes you know, you make a wrong decision. You know, but you do the best you can. You know, you understand the principles, you know, on that, and you do the best you can.
I appreciate the conversation. I actually got to run. What's your name?
Dan Holman.